Hey guys, in this video we're going to be discussing CPC tuning, why it's important to tune the CPC and the TCU and not just the ECU, and what each one of them does and what it controls. This video is not going to be too specific on what we do when we tune cars. It's more so to kind of let the general public know who are in the market for tuning their Mercedes, and why it's important to do all three instead of just doing one, what effects it'll have if you only tune the ECU, for example, instead of tuning all three, etc. So if we talk about the E63S, the W213 chassis, Mercedes introduced a CPC module in that chassis, and they've moved pretty much all the torque control from the ECU to the CPC. The thing is, if you, let's say, only choose to tune the ECU, you have no control over torque. So what we can do in the ECU is we can tell it that at the same boost pressure, by adjusting the optimal torque map, we can tell it that at the same boost pressure, it's making less torque or it's making more torque, right? Now, what'll happen if we say that, okay, it's making less, now the ECU will no longer be triggering a torque limitation that is set by the CPC and the transmission, and it's going to run off of the next limit, whether it's going to be the load limit or the boost limit or whichever other limit is in place in the ECU side, until it hits the next limit, which would be then in the CPC or the transmission, whatever it's set to. So the problem with doing that, under-reporting torque specifically, because that's what people used to do before CPC tuning and transmission tuning were available, you risk slipping the transmission. So you can keep increasing the output of the car, or the output of the engine like that, but at a certain point, you're not going to have enough line pressure in the transmission to hold the torque and the power that it makes, or let's call it the torque that it makes. And then obviously you run into slippage issues, and it doesn't shift properly when you're under load. When you get into bigger turbos and stuff like that, and you're trying to make more power, it just doesn't work. So the real proper solution is to go ahead and tune the CPC and tune the transmission. Now, when we set it up like that, we don't touch the reported torque in the ECU. So the way the calibration was from factory, it's the way it stays. We don't modify that. We simply increase the limits in the other modules, so we now don't trigger those limits when we try to increase boost pressure and make more power.
As we always tell our customers, it's important to have all three modules in the car reporting the same torque or working within the same settings. This way, you're not under-reporting in the ECU to trigger the transmission and the CPC, and you actually have full control over your clutch line pressure, over your torque limiters. CPC also allows you to control the exhaust flap. These cars have three different flaps, two in the rear, one in the middle. If we're talking about the E63 W213, very typical for it to go into limp mode, and this is another solution, to avoid these limp modes.
Yeah, so actually a good point you brought up on the limp mode. A lot of the times these cars come in here and the customer complain that the car feels slow, it feels sluggish, doesn't make power. We end up putting it, but there's no lights on the dash, so we end up putting it on the dyno, run the car, and it makes like 300 horsepower, right? So we already know that the exhaust flaps are a common problem on these cars. They get seized up and stuck and the motors stop operating, but it actually doesn't throw a fault on the dash. What it'll do is you'll need to actually connect the tool to the OBD port, scan it, and you'll see a fault stored in the CPC, which is it comes up under PTCU on Mercedes side, on the Mercedes factory scan tool, and it's the powertrain control unit, which is the CPC. And then you get exhaust flap faults, right? So the way they designed it to work is if there is a flap fault stored in the module, the car goes into like a limp mode. It thinks that the exhaust flap may be clogged and you're not getting all the flow on your exhaust side. So they're doing it to kind of save the turbos, save the motor from
preserve
damage.
the engine from damaging it or having too much back pressure. Or...
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, a lot of the times we end up, like, obviously we'll tell the client what the problem is, and we end up leaving the flaps in an open position, and we code off the flaps from the CPC when we tune it. That's part of our CPC tuning. Another thing that the CPC controls is the intercooler pumps. So on these cars at light load and like lower speeds, the coolant pumps don't flow 100%. They just flow minimal to keep the fluid moving. And with our tuning, we increase the duty cycle on the pump at lower speeds as well as higher speeds. So it gets consistent flow and it keeps those intake temps down, which is very important when you're trying to make more power.
You know, especially we're going almost double the power on these platforms. So you definitely want to improve your cooling and make sure that it's within its maximum efficiency and not what the OEM setting was.
Yeah. Another thing is the speed limit, like Vlad mentioned. So that's all been moved to the CPC. And then the main thing really for making power though is the torque limitation thing, right? So that's kind of the big thing. So this is what a typical CPC looks like on this is a CPC NG. It's on any E63S from 2018 and up, C63S from 2019 and up.
Same with a C43, 2019 plus.
Yeah, the newer S-Class, 2019 and up.
GLC, GLE.
Basically, to be safe, and all the 19 and up cars have it, some 18 and up cars have it as well. Just really need to know the specific details.
And you can message us or call us and ask us. We'll let you know if your car has it or not, and we can check your VIN. Shouldn't be a problem.
I want to show you an example on GLE that we tuned for a customer. It was a 2023 that we first started by doing the ECU only. Now keep in mind, we don't underreport the torque, right? So we're not going to cheat the transmission into thinking it's making less. So it then in turn allows us to raise the boost because, like I said, that's not good for the transmission and the clutches long term.
We don't want to burn a clutch.
Yeah. So we started by doing the ECU only. Same target boost. I target 1.9 bar on 93 on that car, and obviously because of the torque limitation in the CPC and the transmission, it can't hit those target boosts. It starts reducing boost right away, starts pulling timing out, just to maintain that target torque, whatever is set in the CPC and the transmission. So we then did the transmission and did the CPC, and the gain is huge. So I'd like to show that to you and point out the differences so you understand when you go and you call us or you call one of our dealers and you're inquiring about a tune, and we tell you that you need to do all three modules. This is why you need to do all three modules and not just do the ECU. Like some guy across the street will tell you that, doing the ECU is fine and you'll make the same power. It's not the case. Don't listen to that. They'll just take your money and you won't be happy with the end result.
Okay, so on the screen, if you have a look at it, I have loaded the stock graph from the GLE, the 2023 GLE 63S. The stock graph is red. It put down 577 wheel horsepower, 589 foot-pounds at the wheels. Then we have ECU only, which has the increased boost pressure limiters. It has the adjusted ignition timing, lambda tables, load limits, everything I would normally do in a stage 1 or a stage 2 file. And then you can kind of see what's happening, right? So in general, it more or less follows the same torque curve. That's what the limit is set in the TCU and the CPC. The CPC mainly because it has the RPM and gear-based torque limitation. So it's more precise rather than in the transmission where it's just overall torque cap per gear, right? So, like I said, without doing the CPC and the TCU, there's not going to be a whole lot of increase unless you start under-reporting the optimal reported torque from the ECU, which we don't do. And then you have a look at the blue graph, which I will now highlight, and I will remove the one without the CPC and the TCU. So this is a comparison between stock and tuned ECU, TCU, and CPC, where the torque limits have been increased. You can see now the ECU is able to run a lot more boost pressure, which is what I'm trying to target. It's able to hit my timing targets, it hits my lambda targets, everything's running the way I want it to, and it is now not capping the torque in CPC and TCU. So the increase, if we were to look at it, let's say at like pretty much as soon as it comes into boost, so you can start seeing a difference already right after 3000 RPM. It hits peak torque at 3700, 3750, made 750 foot-pounds at the wheels, where before it made 567. So that's almost 200 foot-pounds of torque increase, and it maintains an increase pretty much throughout the entire pool all the way to redline. The biggest horsepower increase was achieved around 5300 RPM, and it went from 524 to 697 at the wheels. So huge increase. This has been data logged. We have so many hours in data logging it on the dyno, on the street, at the track. I know it's safe. I know there's no knock. I know it's good for the fuel that we tune the cars for, which, by the way, we have the ability to modify as per your request. If you wanted to make a file for, let's say you live somewhere in Europe and you have better fuel than what we do, we're able to customize it for your fuel, no problem. We do it all remotely with our data logger. I'll need you to do some pulls on the street or go to a dyno, record some of the data so I can have a look at it, and I'll adjust it accordingly, no problem. But yeah, as you can see, huge increase in power, and this is achieved by doing all three modules. So again, do your research. Don't waste your money with people who tell you don't need it. They don't know what they're talking about. And do it right the first time, and you'll be happy.